was ELR shooting, and some of the things a lot of people talk to us about getting into it. We quite commonly get people asking questions, some of which we can answer, some of which is I can't do as an individual thing. It's really a case of it's in the videos and I try and put it together, and in truth this is part of where I want to be able to try and answer some of those more complicated questions. Essentially with ELR shooting, as I just previously mentioned, there's certainly occasions and times in ELR shooting where things are amplified by, to be honest, it's close to a factor of 10. It's not distance, it is worse for distance, but it's not just I'm shooting 2,000 yards so it's going to be twice as bad as 1,000 yards, or I'm shooting 3,000 so it's going to be twice as bad as, or 3 times as bad as 1,000 yards. It's on many occasions way different to that. It's almost a different form of shooting. What you're dealing with there is you have, in the obvious side of things, the target's further away, so every mistake you make is going to be times by the distance, but the differences beyond that are quite intense. The biggest one is conditions. The biggest one of the conditions is wind, or air I should say. You will find that not only do you get different pressures, which makes the bullet travel at different speeds, but you get different winds that you cannot read. So we get the question, why don't you put out a lot of flags? Well, very simple answer to that. The bullet doesn't travel across the ground. Once you're going to 2,000 yards, you're shooting a couple of 100 feet in the air. You go to 3,000 yards, you're shooting in the 300 feet in the air. You go out, you're getting to places where we'll be shooting 600 feet into the air is where the bullet's arc goes through. Does that make the bullet inconsistent and accurate? No, it doesn't. The bullet flies amazingly accurate. It always surprises me how accurate the crude old technology of firing a bullet down a rifled barrel, how accurate that can be. What is inaccurate and what is inconsistent and what is impossible to read is the actual conditions and where that wind's going. When you're going up through wind, you have different wind layers. Most people will be aware that you have ground wind, you have middle height wind, and then you have wind that's up over the trees, and then you have wind that's up over the hills. Those are wind streams that come through that can be going different directions, tend to be going the same direction, but at different speeds. As the bullet goes up through there, those rivers of wind, whatever, streams of wind, whatever you call them, they vary. They don't move in one pattern. So it's not uncommon to get things move. I tend to find that they tend to move in patterns. And part of the way that I shoot ELR is you know your conditions largely by the last impact. So last time the bullet hit the ground and you saw that, well, you know what the conditions were then. Now, does that tell you what the conditions are next? No, it doesn't. But you'll tend to be getting an idea. With very stable conditions, yes it is. In a very stable day, you can shoot, and if you're lucky, you've read everything pretty well to start off with, and your weather report and everything came together, and you're pretty close. First shot hit, 3,000 yards. Listen, possible, but you're either lucky or a liar. That's my honest call on it, because you cannot read those conditions. There's nothing to tell you the exact conditions. So you can get very close if you know your air very well, and like I said, if you're really lucky, it can all happen, but it's not like shooting 1,000 yards. It's not like shooting 1,500 yards where yes, you can do it. You can see the conditions. Once you've gone out beyond that point, then there's other things involved. Out of that range, you're going to walk a shot in is the best real world scenario. So if they're very stable conditions, a shot, maybe one more shot with really good guys and really stable conditions, generally 2 or 3 or 5, and you're going to get on plate or get on the target or hit the mash you're aiming for through walking it in. Higher altitude, stabler conditions are all things that are going to help versus the distance, but in most conditions, in average conditions, that isn't enough, because what will actually happen is that the 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 seconds of bullet flight, there's a lot of area where the bullet can be adjusted with the wind conditions, and when you take even just 20 seconds between shots, conditions have changed a little bit. So part of the way I work with, and if you watch my shooting, you'll see that I tend to be working with what the conditions are really telling me and trying to, I hate to use the word, but there's a bit of intuition involved. There's a little bit of trying to predict what's going on. And I do that by remembering the last 3 shots, remembering the last 5 shots, remembering the last 10 shots, and trying to work out where those patterns are to make that happen. Is it talking about a realistically sniper shot in the way of you're going to sneak up someone do that? No, I'm not talking about that at all. A bit of luck involved, yes. Right conditions, yes. Then okay, that's a different world. We're talking about ELR shooting. We're trying about getting it done and being able to get into that place and learn things from it. So, and as I have found, if you can be consistent at 5,000 yards and get into some sort of consistency, you'll find that shooting at 2,000 yards becomes a lot simpler. You learn how to read things. Obviously, a really good spotter, obviously really good ammunition, really good rifle, all that sort of stuff is needed, but there is a level of understanding what's going on. Part of what you'll see, and when I'm doing that, and if you have a look at a previous video of the 7mm, at 2 miles is how we pushed it out to. Not as far as I'd ever expect to get a 7mm, but what I'm talking about in that video, or what you'll see in that video, is there's spots where I hit 2 or 3 or 4 shots in one little tiny group. What I'm actually doing there is I'm aiming. I've actually, whether it's got a little bit of hold on there or it's crosshairs on the target, I will do when it's that close, when it's just missed the target, I'll do the same shot again. Why? Because I expect the conditions to change a little bit. I expect them to move a little bit. Which way is it going to move? If it's that close, I'm not going to make that little adjustment, shoot off the side. I'll tend to shoot again. Yes, it gets a bit frustrating when you just hit the 4th time in a 12-inch group this is just next to the target, but very rarely do you find it stays there. When it does, and it's the 3rd shot, I'll tend to make an adjustment and get back onto plate, but I'm really expecting things to move from what I've seen previously. But it is, and I suppose I'd say come back to a little bit of what I said about flexibility. It is about being able to be flexible and adjust to what you think the conditions are doing. You and your spotter have to be working together. You have to see everything. You have to make sense of it. But the way I do it, the shooter, I'm doing the try and predict what's going on. So a very important part of it. Another thing which I would point out with this style of shooting is that the normal comment about loading being so extra specific at ELR shooting, to be honest, yes, it is very important to get very accurate, but certainly for us, and this is something that I can only really say for my shooting, I'm the one in our little team that does the extreme stuff. I have found that the getting extra right in consistency in making my loading feel right and the pressures look right and that sort of stuff, I certainly put a lot of effort into, but I don't go out chasing with a chronograph, spending lots of ammunition and wearing barrels out and things to try and get the perfect DS with shooting extreme long range. That, to be truthful, that little difference, which generally you're looking at once you've got everything pretty good, is very small compared to the weather differences. We'll find a headwind can make, or a tailwind or a shift from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock makes way more difference. So yes, I'm not saying don't put the effort in, but I would say that one of the things, I don't overthink it. I don't over push on it. I don't wear everything out trying to get that perfect. The conditions have more control than the load does, in truth. Another thing I would talk about would be one of the things a lot of people do, and I understand it, but there's a double-edged sword, and that is run a bigger, more powerful, push harder caliber to try and shoot long range. Why? Because it's faster, so it's going to shoot flatter, and it's bigger, so it's going to have more power to cut through the wind, so it's going to get there straighter. So in the maths of it, I get it completely. In the reality of it, unless your gun shoots really, really well, then you're stealing from Peter to pay Paul a little bit. You have to be careful. If the rifle, and listen, don't get me wrong, you want a really big rifle and you've got a good reason to get it, then awesome. You know, I'm not trying to stop that at all. But in the world of, if you're getting beaten around by a big caliber rifle that is hard to shoot super accurately, you struggle to keep a 8 3/4 MOA group at 100 yards, because it does belt you around a fair bit. Well, then ELR, it's just a lot harder work. You can shoot a long way with a smaller caliber. So there is a logic to it. It's why the 375 Shytac sort of wins over 50 cal and wins over the 408 in most cases, is because it's a little bit easier to shoot. It's the same thought, exactly the same as the accuracy and speed of a 7mm versus a 338 Lapua. Yes, the 338 Lapua is a bigger, better long-range round. Is it better when you're shooting 2,000 yards? Depends on how the rifle's set up. Now, obviously it's about rifle setup, obviously it's about weight and that side of things, but my comment is that you can shoot a very long way with a lot less caliber than what you think. It's one of the things that I sort of show. And if really shooter form is the biggest detail you've got to deal with. So once again, not saying shouldn't buy bigger calibers, but I would say that the bigger calibers, it's not all better because the mass is better. There are other things going on with that side of it. But there's a balance, and I get both sides of it, but it's still something to consider. No, the detail, a very important detail. Wind conditions. Now I mentioned how they change and how there's patterns and how there's different wind streams and different heights and all that sort of stuff. Shooting through valleys is obviously multiple different winds going different directions and all that sort of stuff. But a bigger deal that some people know, some people don't, but that is that mild wind can be, when you got light wind in extreme long range shooting, it can be some of the worst conditions you can have. If it truly is light wind with nothing happening, which is super, super rare, truly is, then awesome, you'll tend to do quite well. But generally light wind means light inconsistent wind. And if you've only got 2 miles an hour, but then you got nothing, and then you got 3 miles an hour, and then you got nothing, you got this dribs and drabs of wind, that can be some of the most frustrating stuff. For two reasons. One is, yes, it's not consistent, and actually a 5 or 10 or even a 15 mile an hour wind that is staying consistent is actually a lot easier. As much as you're dealing with all this wind, it's a lot easier to read because it stays there. It's got some pressure, it's got some flow, it stays there, and you can essentially just lean on your wind and work with it. When you've got nearly no wind, there's two things going on. One, it's a bit inconsistent, it'll just be moving you around. One of the big details is it screws with your head, because you're thinking there's no wind, why am I shooting all over the place? And you look there, and if you just study on it, you realise, wait a minute, the little bit of dust or whatever you got going on is going a little bit left and then a little bit right, and it's all over the place. It's something that is generally, the footnote on that one is that light wind is rarely good to shoot ELR in, or I should say very light wind. Mild wind is probably perfect. Heavy wind, you're obviously dealing with too many MOA and you can end up with swirly and all that sort of stuff, and it's all individual to the particular conditions you've got. But I would tend to prefer to have a 10 mile an hour wind than a 3 mile an hour wind. 10 to 15, work with that, you know, depend on where it comes from, and you've got to know your conditions and all that sort of stuff. And I suppose that brings into another area I want to talk about, and that is knowing your conditions, knowing your area is a really important part of the feature. And being able to learn, shooting in different conditions. We're blessed and cursed with the area we shoot now through the fact of it is nice and we've got some great area to shoot to. It's nice countryside to be in. We love being out here. There's lots of valleys and undulations and things, which means that that's a real negative for actual shooting. You'd get so many different stuff of wind flows and things. The real positive we get out of it, and the real thing we're blessed to be able to doing it, is there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of stuff that you can then take from one place and extrapolate to another place by understanding how wind affects through a curve and over the top of a hill and things like that. It really does, there is a lot of knowledge to learn from that, but wind is your biggest enemy. Last thing I want to touch on, and then I'll leave it at that, was scope power. A lot of people, a lot of companies going to larger scope powers, and I understand the theory of it. The truth of it is 25 power is as far as I go. There's other features. We're using the 7x35 Night Force on the big shot. I'm still only running at 25 power. Very clear scope, love the scope, really good. But the 5-25 in the Attacker is still my favourite scope at this moment. Still my favourite scope with the features I got, the windage I got, that sort of stuff, and 25 power works really well. It works really nicely, it's doing nicely, and for most of my stuff I'm only running 25 power at 5Ks. And when the conditions are a little bit poorer, the air's a little bit poorer, I come back to 20 power. If I'm shooting at 2 miles, which I was the other week, then I'm running around 20 power. I'm shooting it back down at 3,000, then 15 to 20. 15 is really my long range shooting. 20 is where I go to for extreme long range shooting. And the main feature you have to understand with all that is that as much as more power seems like an awesome thing, air is not see-through. It's almost see-through. It's very, very thin most of the time. But when you're looking through 3Ks or 4Ks or 5Ks of it, it's not see-through anymore. Obviously different conditions. We have pretty terrible conditions this year, which is why we've stopped on trying to actually hit at 5,000. It is just too hard to see. When we could see splashing things, the air is just too almost smoky, and yet it's not smoky. But it is something where you wind up the power, you lose vision. You've got to come back in power. And it's not about clarity of lenses. It's not about bigger, more powerful lenses. And it's a confusion people have from you. Normally, if you want to look a long way, you're looking up into the sky. When you look up into the sky, there's actually a lot less air. Your air's getting thinner very fast until you're looking through nothing. You're looking through space. When you look across the ground, especially low level ground where we shoot, then all of a sudden you are looking through lots and lots of air. And air's just simply not clean. So as for scope power, I found for normal long range stuff, 15's fine. 20 is really the maximum unless you're going to stupid levels. Other things involved with that with long range shooting, and I've certainly used 25 power when I was trying to shoot a Coke can at 2,000 meters. But it's like it's all relative, and it's not all about more power there. Elevation is still king for me, in the way of having as much internal elevation as possible is still king for me. And there's other things with adjustable bases and all that sort of stuff. But listen, that's a nutshell. That's stuff I wanted to touch on. I just wanted to help a little bit with people that are having some issues getting to the long range stuff or the ELR stuff, and hopefully that's some help. Okay, well listen, that's a bit of an overview, both on a bit of an update to that video and some little changes that I've found I've liked. It's also some touch up on the ELR shooting in the way of trying to help people that are getting into that side of things. Once again, I'll stress that it's not what I'm saying you should do. It's what works for us. We're not professional shooters, but we do a fair bit of this sort of stuff, and it's what has worked for us. So hopefully there's something worth in there for people. For people who want to know more about our bag bases, and they are definitely something that's helped us in this sort of shooting, then I'll put a link below about the bag bases so you can see about that. There's obviously bits and pieces we've done with bipods, where I've modified things, made things, that sort of stuff, but that is a big part as well, how your bipod works in sync with your rifle. I'll put a link down there about the bipods. Muzzle brakes, the same. Our muzzle brakes that we designed, this is a custom one. We don't sell that one. We do sell these ones over here. Work well, we got good comments from them. They're designed so they don't blow up dust. I'll put a link on about that as well. All that stuff you can buy from our store. And listen, for those who liked it, if you aren't subscribed, then please subscribe. Down there you've also got the bell to ring, which will give you notifications so you get to see our new videos that come out. We try and do at least a video a week. For those people who also would like to support us, there's a link down there to help us out with what we're up to. And otherwise, like the video and help us out in that score. So thank you very much for checking us out. I hope you enjoyed what you saw, and we'll catch you next time.